Professor Andrei Iagaru. Professor Iagaru and I first met in 2008 when he was just starting off at Stanford, and he's had quite the journey in the world of nuclear medicine and theragnostics in particular. He actually gave a plenary section at ENM, and he accepted my invitation to give us his considerable experience on theragnostics and nuclear medicine. Professor Iagaru, over to you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, Vinit, for the kind invitation. It's a great honor for me to be in this plenary session and also to attend the conference, which, by the way, had a fantastic program. I really enjoyed going to the talks and seeing so many young people giving very interesting presentations. The title is a little bit misleading in that I will touch upon theragnostics, but everybody's talking about theragnostics, so I chose to tell you a little bit beyond theragnostics, so most of the talk will be beyond theragnostics. But I will start with a little bit of history of nuclear medicine at Stanford University, and then we'll go from there. So we celebrated our Diamond Jubilee last year. We have 75 years of nuclear medicine at my institution. This is the main entrance to Stanford. If you're ever in California or the United States and want to visit, please do reach out and we'll be happy to host you there. And this is the medical campus. It has grown significantly over the past 60 years. Initially, the medical school was established in San Francisco, but then it moved to Palo Alto, where Stanford is, in 1959. So the university, even by US standards, is a new one, having been established in 1885. And that's a sad, but at the same time, fabulous story behind it. The Stanfords were very rich, and their teenage son unfortunately died of typhoid fever during a trip to Europe. So they decided to make a donation in his name to Harvard, but Harvard would not put the Stanford name on any of the buildings. So Stanford Sr. decided to create his own university. He was a railroad magnate and California governor, owned a lot of land. He donated that land and the money to start the university. And ironically, in 2014, New York Times ran a story calling Harvard the Stanford of the East. So we like to brag a little bit about that. But my main point here is there are 7 schools at Stanford. School of Medicine is one of them, and the university is focused mainly on research, as you can see from the annual budget, about $1.7 billion for research. This, I think, is reflected in the number of Nobel Prize winners, 36 since inception, 21 currently on campus, and if you follow mathematics and science in that domain, Turing Awards, 7 awardees are currently at Stanford. If you're familiar with the academic system in the US, sports play a very important role, and there are hundreds of Stanford students who are Olympic gold medalists, mostly in the Summer Olympics. Obviously, California will contribute mostly to summer sports. And probably you use at least a product from some of those companies that were studied by Stanford students or faculty that are on the right side of the screen. But what you may not know is that movies actually were not studied in Hollywood. Movies were studied on the Stanford campus, and if you visit, there's an area where you can see the first cinematic projection of these photographs creating the first movies presentations in the United States. As I said, the medical school moved from San Francisco to Palo Alto in 1959, and this is how the campus looked at that time. That's a medical school. The hospital in 1959 was very small, designed to be kind of an NIH of the West Coast, focused mostly on research. And this is how it looks now, the same area, so there's not a drop where you can build anymore. Everything has been built up due to high demand for healthcare. This is the same everywhere in the world, but just to illustrate how much things have changed over several decades. And this is where we practice now. We have several locations. The main philosophy of the healthcare system is to come where the patients are, as opposed to have the patients travel where we are. So of course, we don't do everything at every facility. We do the simple things in all of them, and then if someone or something requires more acute care, something more specialized, they're referred to the main campus. But we try to be as close to where the patients are throughout the Bay Area. I said I'll say a few words about the nuclear medicine history. Dr. Newell was the chair of radiology, but he resigned when the new discipline was formed in 1947, and he led it for 10 years, and there's some awards in his name and an annual lecture in his name as well. He was followed by Dr. Joe Chris, who ran the division for 3 decades or so. He was very well known for a lot of things, including the introduction of computers in nuclear medicine. He discovered the fact that grave disease was caused by antibodies. He worked with a colleague in radiation oncology, Sarah Donaldson, on treatment for this disease. And he was also an artist. He created art using computers, so very interesting personality. He was followed by Bill Strauss, who was an expert in cardiovascular medicine, who built the division further, but who after 9/11 decided to return to his roots in New York to be closer to the family. He was on a plane actually at the time of those tragic events. And then I want to spend a few minutes on Dr. Ross McDougall, a Scotsman, someone very closely associated with the society here. He was the editor for the Nuclear Medicine Communications for a good number of years, and I think he did a fantastic job in that role. I know that he presented at this meeting, and he kept his roots to the British nuclear medicine community very close. These are quotes from different letters that were written about him. He received many awards over his more than 4 decades at Stanford. He was the director of the American Board of Nuclear Medicine, the chief of staff at Stanford, really an enormous personality. He's happily retired now, playing golf, tennis, and skiing, enjoying his grandkids. But he was very influential. He was my residency program director. If you like thyroid, for many decades his books were the go-to for the practice of thyroidology, and he kept updating them. And he's universal walking encyclopedia. He wrote 2 books about Scotsmen. They're available on Amazon if you're interested. They have very interesting stories. I now know how many prime ministers were from Scotland, and a few more other stories about this part of the world. So really a phenomenal personality, well loved by everyone he interacted with. And these are just a collage of pictures from various instances. You can see a very young Ross in the 70s when he moved from Glasgow to Stanford, some of his early years in the 80s at Stanford as well, as throughout the years receiving awards and seeing patients as just being such a great colleague and mentor to so many of us. And I cannot ignore the fundamentals of what Sam was able to establish in his relatively short tenure at Stanford. He came in 2003. He established a clinic where we now practice in 2010, and he opened a few centers, the Canary Center for Early Cancer Detection, the Precision Health Center, the Molecular Imaging Program, the Center for Nanotechnology, each funded to the billions of dollars. He was a brilliant man. We miss him dearly, and you will see me mentioning his name throughout my presentation because he was so influential on so many of us, and so many of us are at Stanford because of him. Now I'll focus on some of the progress that we made in nuclear medicine, and I will start with the invention of the cyclotron at Berkeley on the other side of Bay Area, and then the Benedict Casson linear scanner at UCLA, and Hal Anger also in Berkeley, creating the camera whose design is still in use by most of the vendors these days, and then Bruce Hasegawa at UCSF who created the SPECT-CT, the first SPECT-CT prototype. So a lot of good things coming out of California, and a lot of good things coming from the nuclear medicine community overall. This is from my go-to book for skeletal disease. You can see significant evolution over time. Each of these were state of the art at the time when they were used, and just look at sodium fluoride with a rectilinear scanner in the 70s versus the sodium fluoride with current technology, PET-CT. So we came really a long way. Our community has a lot of things to be proud of because we achieved a lot over the past few decades. And the story of PSMA, it's another one that's worth mentioning. I said Monday in the industry-sponsored presentation about, I mentioned the prostacyclin, something that was available but nobody wanted to read because it required all those blood pool SPECT, and the images were blurry and not very diagnostic. But look where we are now with 2 FDA-approved agents in the United States and many more to come. These are reflected in our numbers. These are our volumes growing over time in all aspects of nuclear medicine. So it's not just PET, it's not just therapies, it's not just bone densitometry. General nuclear medicine is growing as well. And if you add all of them, they more than tripled over the past decade plus. So it's a large demand for nuclear medicine services, which shows that what we offer to the referring physicians and their patients, it's something of great value. No one will order an exam if it will not provide useful information for their patients. So we're very proud of that. Not only that, but if you look at these numbers from the Department of Radiology at Stanford over the past 4 fiscal years, PET had the largest growth out of all modalities last year. General nuclear medicine had the largest growth over all radiology modalities in the year before. So this is remarkable. We're competing with CT, MRI, ultrasound, radiography. And 2 most recent fiscal years, nuclear medicine and PET had the largest growth. And this shows how vibrant what we do is, how vibrant the nuclear medicine community is worldwide. So I think that we have reasons to congratulate ourselves for that. As far as research, we're also able to attract a lot of research funding from the NIH, and we've been second after MGH over the past couple of years, but again, Stanford, it's a relatively small institution, so if you normalize by the number of faculty, the story would be a little bit different. We have a cyclotron and radiochemistry facility who currently operates 1 cyclotron since 2005, and a second one will be installed later this year. And the goal of our preclinical program is to create everything from target discovery to isotope labeling to clinical translation to improvements in physical instrumentation. And we're always willing and able to collaborate with others from academia or from industry to achieve these goals. We went from 3 radiopharmaceuticals when we opened in 2005 to more than 30 currently, and the list is growing, and you can see here what some of these radiopharmaceuticals are. So we hold INDs for all of these. So now I'll tell you a little bit about what I think it's a recipe for success. You cannot be successful if any of these things are missing, in my opinion. And I'll start with space. Space is critical, and this is the clinic that Stanford opened under Sam's direction in 2010. It brought together all aspects of nuclear medicine: SPECT, PET, cardiac, radiochemistry, physics lab. We expected the growth of Theragnostics, so around 2015 we had to move Craig Levins, our physicist, from this area highlighted in red to a new lab space because we wanted the infusion area for Theragnostics to be in the same space where nuclear medicine is. So this opened last year, and it has 4 private rooms for infusions, 2 restrooms. Getting the restrooms was the most difficult thing because they don't generate revenue, and the hospital wants to make money out of every space that's available there. But we're able to treat up to 12 Pluvicto patients a day, and this allows us to absorb the required volumes for the clinic. Not only this, the hospital buildings from 1989 are being renovated to be transformed into a cancer hospital, and in this cancer hospital, which is next door to where nuclear medicine is at Stanford, we will have 3 lead-lined rooms. So this will allow us to do inpatient treatments as well. There are very few in the United States that require inpatient admissions, but for first-in-humans, I think that it's proper to admit some of these patients, so we'll be ready to accommodate them. This unit will open later this year. And this is the new radiochemistry facility. It's that side of the building. It's about 3 miles from the hospital. It's the old Theranos building, so for those of you who are familiar with the story, we'll try to turn bad blood into good blood when we open this space. We're hopeful that we'll be able to do just that. And this will house a new cyclotron with solid targetry that will allow us to implement some of the new isotopes for clinical and research use. And these are pictures taken just a couple of weeks ago showing all the digging that has to be done to install a cyclotron. Equipment, as I said, it's very important. Sam was a pioneer in this area as well. This is him next to the first PET insert coil for a PET-MR. He was a great supporter of PET-MR, and we installed the first one worldwide in December 2013, and he wrote an introduction to our book where he pretty much said that we shouldn't spend too much time on finding killer apps because this will come naturally. And I think that between neuro applications, pelvic malignancies, liver disease, one can fill a full day of PET-MR schedule given the lengthy duration of these examinations and run the PET-MR in MR-only mode the rest of the day and still have a successful practice. So we currently have 4 PET MRIs in our system. One is for research only, one is for adult use, one is for pediatric use, and one is at the Veteran Administration Hospital, mostly for research, but for some clinical use as well. And our physicists published the performance of these scans. We show that it's at least as good as PET-CT. And then we're able to collaborate with engineers at the vendor to create new software that will solve some problems. Problems such as scatter correction artifact for gallium isotopes. This is the projection image, so other than the extent of disease, you'd think that the image quality is good, but if you look at single coronal slices, you have this scatter artifact. People propose giving Lasix, putting Foley catheters. Both of them I would not recommend, but with this new software that it's a click away on the machine, you can bring back the activity and bring back the presence of nodal disease. So technical developments as well. There's a lot of work having been done in the UK on these new reconstructions. We showed it that we can apply it to PET-MR and select the appropriate one for the use of gallium-68 labeled radiopharmaceuticals. We also show that you can go very fast as far as PET goes in PET-MR. There are several publications using another scanner that recommended a minimum of 4 minutes per bed in PET-MR for gallium-labeled radiopharmaceuticals. I would argue that even 1 minute per bed allows identification of those 2 lymph nodes involved by prostate cancer, but there's no way that you can do all the MR sequences in 1 minute. In fact, you can barely squeeze them in 2.5 or maybe 3 minutes. So being able to do 2 minutes per bed PET with PET-MR puts the pressure on our MR colleagues to make MR faster so that PET-MR can compete with PET-CT in some of these oncological applications. Some of these led to receiving the Mini. These are images acquired with PET-MR showing that you can actually multiplex. It's the same patient with prostate cancer, showing that you need to interrogate various targets in the biology of cancer in order to identify where the disease is coming from. And as far as I know, it's the first prospective publication using PSMA PET-MR in patients with high-risk prostate cancer prior to prostatectomy, demonstrating that sum is better than the parts. So when you do PET and MR, you're better than PET alone, you're better than MR alone. And more recently, we took men with negative or equivocal MRI and high suspicion for prostate cancer, and then they underwent both PSMA as well as bombesin PET with MRI, and we were able to identify cancer. And in this example, in red here is the prostate cancer located based on PET, and the green dots are where the urologist missed the cancer on saturation biopsies. The anterior aspect of the prostate gland is very difficult to be touched by these biopsies. But both PSMA and bombesin identified the cancer, and this was subsequently confirmed by biopsies. So I don't recommend PSMA PET-MR in every man with suspected prostate cancer because multiparametric MRI is so good. But for those men with PIRADS 1 to 3, instead of annual surveillance or repeated biopsies, going to PSMA PET-MR, it's the way to go. PET-CT, the same story. We now have an all-digital fleet. I think that, as I said on Monday, if you have men with low PSA values, you must refer them to a center that has digital scanners because you increase the possibility of finding where the disease is coming from. And we've shown throughout various papers that digital PET is superior over standard PMT PET. This also allows us to do new applications. Our colleagues in head and neck surgery wanted a radiopharmaceutical that would be a little bit more specific than FDG for directing neck dissection. So we labeled panitumumab, a VEGF receptor targeting agent, with zirconium-89. And these patients underwent surgery, and they confirmed that using this radiopharmaceutical, they're able to limit the amount of neck dissection because, different from FDGs, this does not go where there is no overexpression of the VEGF receptor. And with a digital scanner, you're able to acquire high image quality. And if you increase the length of time, as it was needed over the head and neck, you acquire high image quality, even with less than 1 millicurie of zirconium, 144 hours out. So a lot of progress in the PET technology. Some of my colleagues are working on integrin alpha V beta 6. This is a marker of fibrosis, including tumor fibrosis. We initially developed this for pancreatic cancer detection, and I'll show you later why. But different from mice, where there was no GI tract uptake, in humans, the entire GI tract lights up. So obviously not a very good radiopharmaceutical for pancreatic cancer detection. And this is another example of Sam's wisdom. He used to say it's called research for a reason. It's rare that you are successful on your first attempt. But we recalibrated and we noticed that there's nothing above the diaphragm, so perhaps this can be used for something else. And my colleague Henry Guo is using this tracer for IPF. You can see the high signal in abnormal lung. And it shows that after transplant, the normal lung has no accumulation while the diseased lung has uptake. And what else? There's a lot of lung fibrosis in COVID. So we are now following a cohort of COVID patients long-term. This is 12 months after COVID pneumonia demonstrating diffuse fibrosis in the lungs. And there are now drugs that are reducing the level of fibrosis by targeting exactly this integrin alpha V beta 6. So the next step would be to do pre and post therapy using alpha V beta 6 targeting agents like NOTIN. And I heard a lot of talk about extended field of view PET, total body PET. How long is total body is still debatable, I think, but there's so much that we can do with this, not just for workflows, but for research as well. I can't think of a better tool to follow live the pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics of a new radiopharmaceutical. I cannot think of a better tool for cancer screening, and that's one of the intents of what we plan to do going forward when we will install an extended field of view PET. We will look at targeted enriched population, high-risk cohorts for pancreatic cancer, high-risk enriched cohorts for lung cancer, and use novel tracers to try to screen, to try to identify early this disease. This work from my colleagues at Canary Center, where they're able to identify microvesicles, so markers of cancer that are shed by these tumors and found in the blood. So they're able not to identify various targets on these microvesicles, but they've also created the mechanisms, the tools to be able to filtrate these microvesicles. So one idea is for all of these patients who are undergoing extended field of view PET for screening to also get blood draws every time they get the scan, and therefore try to correlate with the findings on imaging with what may be suggested by the technology. And these are no longer proof of concepts that have been built, so they're waiting for us to be able to do the research. Again, this is an example from a patient with lung cancer undergoing as simple as an FDG right now, but we will focus on new radiopharmaceuticals going forward. And our colleagues are able to cluster these vesicles based on size as well as various omics and able to tell what the risk is for what type of disease, and perhaps in the future even how to treat these patients, because we will know what treatment to be given. A lot of progress in SPECT-CT as well, again an all solid-state detector fleet. And this is a recent publication where we've shown that you can do SPECT at the speed of PET. This is not a joke. I'll show you in a few slides. So this is our workflow. We do SPECT after each cycle of Pluvicto. And these are examples. 12 minutes for a whole body SPECT-CT versus 10 minutes per PET. No longer an excuse not to use SPECT-CT when needed. And this is done at 1 hour post-Pluvicto, so we don't do imaging at 24 hours. There are two arguments against. One is payment. There is now payment even if you do SPECT on the same day of treatment. The other one is, can it really predict what happens? This work from my colleague Hong Song showing that you can do total body PSMA volume, and this is after the first cycle and subsequent cycle, and the decrease in total PSMA volume is predictive of the outcome and correlates very nicely with PSA drop. So there's predictive value even in 1 hour post-treatment. So we no longer have to tell these patients to come back the next day. We no longer take 1 hour, or even with reduced scans, as we heard in a prior talk today, 30 minutes, now 10 to 12 minutes, vertex to mid-size for most patients. So this is very useful for accommodating this in day-to-day practice. And I've shown this example on Monday, pre-Pluvicto PYL, so PSMA PET, nodal disease in the pelvis. The treatment went there, 1 hour post-treatment scan. We probably should not have given the second cycle because there's no more uptake on CT, there's no more nodal disease, the PSA has become undetectable. So these men, because we scanned them, and because we correlated with the PSA, will not receive treatment cycles 3, 4, 5, and 6 at this time because there's nothing to treat, right? Theragnostics is you see what you treat and you treat what you see. So these treatments come with toxicity, will spare the cost and the toxicity for when the biochemical recurrence will reoccur. We're not curing these patients right now, so they will all want and need more treatments in the future. So let's give them where they have disease that is visible on our imaging. Same thing for DOTATATE. We do in grade 2 neuroendocrine tumors, we do both FDG and dotatate. So here, both lesions in the mediastinum and nodal disease demonstrate uptake. However, post-Lutathera, only one of them demonstrates uptake. I mean, we're seeing that they're the same molecule, but they're not. There are some subtle differences between the gallium dotatate and the lutetium dotatate. And if you don't scan these patients, we don't know how the treatment distribution looks compared to the diagnostic scan. So here, we would not expect for this lesion to respond because the treatment did not go there. But perhaps these patients can receive external radiation. It's another new technology developed at Stanford and now marketed. It's PET-guided radiation biology, radiation therapy. So you no longer use the CT or MR to guide the treatment. You use the PET signal to treat. And with this, different from SABR, you can treat 5 to 6 lesions in one session. So you inject the dotatate, use that signal to treat with external radiation the area that did not accumulate the lutetium-labeled therapy. So it opens up a whole new slew of opportunities. And you may wonder, if you see all the same lesions, then why do these PET CTs? Well, one of them is that there's predictive value in response to Lutathera in this case. The total volume of disease is predictive as well. But more importantly, let's look at this patient. Extensive disease, liver, nodal, bone, pre-Lutathera. Most of the lesion, but not all, are seen on the post-Lutathera scan. Same thing here. No change on PET mid-cycle. Again, the large lesions, liver, lymph nodes are seen, but none of the bony lesions are seen. And this is not just size. There's something different about the biology of this nodal bone metastasis that makes it such that the lutetium tate does not go to the same locations as the gallium or copper-64 tate. And if we don't scan, we don't know. And is this just a hypothesis, or maybe there's some truth? Well, we looked back about 120 patients treated with Lutathera, and about 15% have progression of disease despite receiving lutetium tate. 60% of these who progressed were in the bone. So this is not just a hypothesis. This was before we started scanning after each cycle. So if we don't see the treatment going to the bony lesions, why do you expect the bone lesions to respond? It doesn't make sense. They should receive some other treatments. I will end with this slide about Theragnostics. Everybody is so focused on PSMA, but there are the targets, and PSMA, even at best, it's expressed in up to 90% of prostate cancer. And even in that case, not all the lesions are seen with PSMA, as we've seen again and again. So gas-releasing peptide receptor can offer an alternative. Also has a biodistribution that will not expose men to salivary gland or lacrimal gland toxicity from these treatments. And of course, the pancreas lights up, but the pancreas washes out by 24 hours after giving treatment. So the same Theragnostics concept can be used with gastrin receptor peptide as well. It's the first patient ever treated, and you'll see the lutetium bombesin is retained in all the bony metastases, while already by 72 hours and 24 hours it washes out from the pancreas. So pancreas is not a dose-limiting organ. And this was confirmed as well by the group in Rostock, demonstrating that all the lesions retain the therapy drug while the pancreas washes out. So this is an alternative, not for every man, but when PSMA fails, I think that this will open new doors. Going forward, collaborations are very important. We cannot achieve any of this if we don't collaborate with our colleagues in medical oncology, radiation oncology, and urology. So we need to play well with each other, and these are my colleagues in these subspecialties at Stanford. We also need to collaborate with the industry. This is a slide from pharma showing how much expectations they have for growth in nuclear medicine, and these are the top 20 radiopharma companies based on market cap, and we collaborate with half of them. So I think that the partnership between academia and industry is very important for advancing our science. We also give back to the community. Over the last decade, we had research studies prior to FDA approval for TATE, for PSMA. The patient paid nothing for these scans at my institution, and very proud that we gave back to the community. We provided reports, we covered the cost of the scan, of the tracer, but we did not charge. I think that this is the way to go to build trustship with your local community. And the most important thing in this entire spectrum of success is, of course, the people, visionaries, and we're lucky to have two great visionaries. Greg Glazer, who was the chair who recruited Sam, and Sam, who became chair and then contributed to the great growth of nuclear medicine. Very important is to put trust in new people, and we established the first program in the US where trainees get board certified in both nuclear medicine and radiology. So we started this program in 2014. We have every year many applicants. These are our current trainees. It's a diverse group of trainees. Last year we had 50 applications for one position. It's a very popular program, and it has been adopted by others in the United States as well. This is the structure of the program. The first year it's in internal medicine or surgery, then they spend 1 year in nuclear medicine, 3 years in radiology, and they come back to nuclear medicine. So perhaps not extensive as one would want, but definitely better than the standard 4 months of nuclear medicine training that most radiologists receive in the United States. So I think at the end of this 6 years training, one would be able to run a nuclear medicine clinic, be an academician, and do research as well. And not everybody will need to be trained this way, but some trainees will benefit from participating in such programs. We collaborate extensively. This is the molecular imaging program at Stanford. There are multiple trainees who came to our institution and are now throughout the world. We stay in touch with them. We collaborated with Vinit a decade ago. We stayed in touch. I'm here, he invited me. And there are many other examples of collaborations, very fruitful collaborations between our institution and others throughout the world. So please do reach out if you're interested in collaborating. So now a little bit about the future, and I hope that this will be the more exciting part of what you'll hear from me today. Not everything is cancer, and not everything is neurology, and not everything is cardiology. There's a holy grail of infection imaging, and this has been the holy grail in nuclear medicine for decades. There's still an unmet need. We do indium or technetium labeled white blood cells, we do gallium citrate, we do FDG, we still don't find infection reliably. So Sam and Gayatri had the idea of labeling fluoromaltotriose, which is used by many bacteria, including E. coli with F18. And this is the concept that was used for the tracer development. And this is the model of infection, and you can see very clear accumulation of this radiopharmaceutical in the site of artificially created infection. This is now in the stage of pre-IND submission, so we are continuing the development of this tracer with toxicology studies, and hopefully in the next year or so we'll be able to use it in patients with negative or equivocal indium-111 labeled white blood cells that are still suspected to have infections. This is work from my colleague Michelle James. She had a failure of one of the radio tracers developed for neuroimaging, so she's sort of developing a machine learning tool for predicting if a tracer will cross the blood-brain barrier. So this is the one that she developed for assessing microglial function. The different scores, a score above 3 indicates that the new drug will pass the blood-brain barrier. So with this score, she achieved 4.2. With this other system, she achieved 4 out of 6, but it didn't cross the blood-brain barrier. So this was really frustrating. It was also very costly because you all know how much it costs to develop a new drug. So she underwent this effort with some of her postdocs to create a library of what worked and what didn't work historically as far as what will cross the blood-brain barrier. And this model was supposedly good at predicting a new tracer, whether it should be used for humans. So this is a new tracer that was developed. It scored 5.9 with the old tool, 5 out of 6. And then 3.13 with the new tool. Remember, everything above 3 should be good. And it did cross the blood-brain barrier, so very encouraging results. I asked her if she can do something like this for whole-body oncological agents, because we fail a lot of times there as well. Had she used this tool for the initial agent, you have scored 1.66, so they would not have taken it into further development. So very nice work, quite successful. This is work from my colleague Corinne Baynat. She's working on a second generation of FSPGs. This is a glutamate analog. FSPG has been tried in lung nodule detection. Unfortunately, it works for lung cancer, but also works for granulomatous disease. So not very helpful in differentiating the two in lung nodules. However, this new agent that she's developing is able to find cancer while not being taken up in areas of inflammation. So we look forward to seeing more of this. Corinne also worked on the pyruvate kinase M2. This is an enzyme that has been shown to be overexpressed in gliomas, and she has done studies, first in human studies that were published recently, demonstrating that you can find the glioma, and also that they can assess response to treatment in these patients with recurrent GBM. So again, an area of unmet need. I know that in Europe you have access to fluoroethyl tyrosine, maybe in the UK as well. We don't have that. We have a need for new tools for identifying accurately the recurrence and the response to treatment in GBM. Corinne is also working on this new target of pan-cancer, and this is overexpressed in several cancers, including, as you can see here, prostate, breast, colon, lung, and stomach cancer. So this has the beauty of being able not only for diagnostic purposes, but also for therapy purposes. So if this is successful, this may open new avenues for Theragnostics. My colleague Kathy Ferrara is working also on tracer development, but she starts with the omics approach. And why is this? We want to use this, as I said, for cancer screening. So this is data used together with Walter Park in our high pancreatic cancer risk population, IPMN, for example. And sorry to disappoint the crowd that believes in FAP, but there's very little expression of FAP in these pre-cancerous lesions. So using FAP to identify a cancer early, I think is not going to be a strategy that will work. But there are other targets, such as integrin alpha V beta 6, that are overexpressed and are likely to work there. Once you get to pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, the story changes a little bit in that you can start seeing signal from FAP markers there as well. So again, FAP may be good for established pancreatic cancer, but not for early detection of pancreatic cancer. So I think that's very important as so many people focus their energies on FAP. Another unmet need study from Sam's lab is T-cell activation. So we watch CAR T stories. We see how some patients respond, some do not. We identify the OX40 receptor as a marker of activated T cells. The problem with most of the radiopharmaceuticals targeting T cells is that they target both activated and inactive T cells. We only want to see where the activated T cells are going, and we think that this approach with OX40 will work. We've done some preclinical studies demonstrating the high affinity of this target. It's labeled with zirconium-89. And this attracted the attention from Pfizer. They have immunotherapies, and we are collaborating with them in the joint co-development of this radiopharmaceutical, and we hope to have some results sometime next year. And this is data demonstrating the high signal accumulation here versus the lack of it when there are no activated T cells. I will end with some thoughts that I mentioned in conversation with some of you. You know, have this high influx of referrals, and we have long wait times. But what if we get paid to image less? What if we can find disease earlier? And this, if you haven't read it, it's a very interesting conversation between Sam and Johannes. And Sam said that we shouldn't celebrate when the hospitals are full. We should celebrate when they're empty. And the truth there is that we focus so much, for example, at the end stage of disease, and so little at the beginning. It's 43 times more expensive to treat melanoma stage 4 than early finding. These are the increases expected in the US. That's a huge amount, 34% increase in healthcare expenditures. I just don't see how that will happen. The cost of breast cancer, stage 0, $42,000, $134,000 for stage 4. And then for families, the average monthly income pre-tax in the US is $3,600. The average cost here is way higher than that. So we clearly need to do a better job at finding cancer early, and that's why I said that while I embrace the Theragnostics, and I think it's wonderful for our specialty, and we've invested millions over the past decade to have space for Theragnostics, I think we should invest equally in finding disease early, and we shouldn't talk about precision medicine, and we should talk about precision health. And if you think that these are things of the future, and if you believe in Big Brother, then earmuffs, because what I'm going to tell you now is that we actually need to be monitored. We need to have sensors that will tell us from birth until later on what is our risk for certain diseases, and if the risk is high, we should have someone intervene. And we all wear watches and all sort of other devices. Why not make those devices the ones that will tell us when are we at high risk for developing a certain disease? And Sam used to use the analogy of the airplanes, right? If an airline can monitor an engine from takeoff to landing and tell the mechanics on the ground that this engine requires an oil change or requires something else, why can we not monitor humans as well? And this is from one of these papers showing that we can create a digital alter ego of ourselves and being able to intervene early so that we can have a chance at cure at a lower cost overall for the healthcare system. Stanford has joined forces with Google, with Verily, in this large study, 10,000 healthy volunteers monitored yearly until they develop disease. And they have sensors, they donate urine, lacrimal tissue, tears, blood annually, and then when they develop disease, they will try to go back and look at those tissue and fluid samples and see if they can correlate with any marker of cancer. There are more than 5,000 patients who have been enrolled, and this is from the first publication from this study. So I think that we shouldn't be so focused on what we currently do to ignore all the developments around us. We should keep an open mind, open ear, collaborate with each other, and just accept change. Change is not always good, but change is needed, and we should embrace it. With that, I want to acknowledge our group, who has grown now to more than 60 people, and thank you all for the invitation and for being here in the room.
Thank you very much, Professor Iagaru, for that fantastic and entertaining talk. As a token of our appreciation, I hope you'll accept this certificate on behalf of the BNMS. Professor Iagaru.